Hello and welcome back to episode number 36 of Inside the Vault. I'm your host, Ryan Smith. My guest here today on Inside the Vault, he is the co-host of Giglio and Ovius, Joe Giglio, here on the podcast with me. You can follow him on Twitter at Giglio_OG. Joe Giglio, welcome to Inside the Vault, my man. How are you?
Appreciate you having me on, Ryan.
Yeah, let's get right into it. Before we head into Panther news, for those who may not be as familiar with you and Joe Obius's work, walk me through how you guys kind of created OG YouTube and the whole the landscape into the podcast and how you guys got that started. It's doing really well so far.
Yeah, it's been quite an adventure, Ryan. Actually, 1 year ago, May 3rd was our first episode.
Nice.
So, 1 million views and about 870,000 downloads later, here we are. Obviously it wasn't our choice to go out on our own, but
Sure.
sometimes you get choices made for you and you just try to make the best of those situations. And the media landscape is so tenuous. It's hard. It's hard whether you're with a company or without a company. Either way, it's hard. So,
Yeah.
I'm really proud of what we've been able to do in these past 12 months. It's been rewarding. I'll put it that way. It's been difficult, but it's definitely been rewarding.
Yeah. Well, I know from your time at the other place and obviously now here on YouTube, you guys are very familiar with the Panthers. So this is a Panthers podcast. We'll get right into it. Just start with your kind of off-season takeaways from 2024. We won't go into the Matt Rule era, the Frank Reich area. We'll leave that all in the back burner. So let's just focus on 2024 and beyond. So talk to me about this offseason, your overall takeaways to start.
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest with you, Ryan. I actually did not. I did not dislike what they tried to do last year with Frank Reich.
Sure.
So I want to start with that.
Yeah.
I was on a. I'm sorry, we're going to go back. I was on the CJ Stroud train, but I understood what they were trying to do with Bryce Young.
Yeah.
So I didn't disagree with some of the moves they made last year. Obviously, Miles Sanders was a gigantic bust, and now you see Canales bringing in Rashad Penny, and I really don't think you're going to see Miles Sanders play for the Panthers ever again. And no one is lamenting that, given how poorly he played last year, and maybe he really wasn't ever healthy. I don't know. So I just want to preface all of my comments about what they've done this offseason by giving people the background of I did not mind what they tried to do to help Bryce Young last year. Now, with that being said, I like all of the things they've done in the draft and free agency and in trades to help Bryce Young, and including hiring Canales. You got to start there.
Yeah.
Because I think the Panthers looked at Bryce Young as their primary asset, which he is, and they said, okay, we paid a premium price for him. That doesn't mean we cut him and try to go draft Kirk Cousins. It means we have to do what we can do to help him be successful. And, starting with Deontay Johnson, I thought that was a really good move. Then you move on, league it in the first round. That's a great pick. And they didn't give up a lot to get him, move up the one spot. I thought that was important too. I know they shuffled around a little bit with some of their other picks, to get Brooks. But to me, they didn't do anything stupid, and they did pretty much everything they could to help their primary asset, who's Bryce Young. So to me, that's a win. That's a big win for them this offseason, in my opinion. Does a big win transfer to a trip to the Super Bowl? Probably not. But it puts you on the right path to have a productive season. And given the division that they're in, it also gives you a chance to be competitive in that division. So I think all good things for the Panthers this offseason, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah. My grade so far from Dan Morgan would be a B plus. I thought the 2025 second round pick that we got back from the Rams was very advantageous for Morgan to get on draft weekend. And that was something, honestly, I didn't expect. I know a lot of people probably went in thinking that was a shock when we got that second round pick back for next year. So Dan Morgan's definitely been impressed so far. You just talked about Rashad Penny, who the Panthers did sign today, former Seattle Seahawk, Philadelphia Eagle, who played with Dave Canales up in Seattle. You said Miles Sanders, you're thinking he's going to get cut, he's going to get traded to maybe to Dallas. I heard some of those rumors out there, and roll with Chuba, Jonathan Brooks when he's healthy, and then Rashad Penny is kind of that change of pace back. we'll see. But this Rashad Penny signing, it threw me off today. I'll be honest. I wasn't sure what to think of it.
I think you want to get guys as Canals figures some things out. You want guys who know what you're trying to do,
Yeah.
and the original king of this, Ryan. And I don't know how old you are, and I don't exactly know your background. So, Bill Parcells was the king of this when he was with the Giants, and after he left the Giants, he would go somewhere, and invariably Dave Meggett would be on the team, or Zeke Mowat would be on the team, or Pepper Johnson. There was always a Bill Parcells guy. And I think you see a lot of coaches try to do that now. Okay, who was I with in Seattle? Who understands what I'm trying to do? Who can be someone the players can go to and then say, "Hey, what is coach like? Well, what does coach dislike? He just yelled at me. What does that mean?" Or, I haven't heard from coach in 2 weeks. What does that mean? I think those are all the kind of players that you bring in. That doesn't mean Rashad Penny is going to be their, bell cow back. I just think you need players like that at least in training camp where you're like, okay, I can go, even a Bryce Young can go talk to him and say, hey, what's coach like? What does this all mean? So I think the running back situation with Brooks, obviously they thought he was someone who could be dynamic and help them. Chuba's he's a nuts and bolts kind of guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought he came on at the end of last year. I helped me out was Deontay Foreman the year before.
Correct.
I
Correct.
really liked
Yes.
him. I didn't like that they let him go after a year, but
I,
that's the
I
nature
agree
of the
with you
running
on that
back
one.
position. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you get one, you plug one in. You get one, you plug one in. And honestly, that's what Frank was trying to do with Sanders, a guy in Philly who would have understood his offense and understood what he was trying to do and the principles of what they were trying to do. So again, not a bad concept. And I think that's what the Panthers really need to try to get past this year. You can have a good idea, you can have a good concept, but how do you put that into practice? How do you
Mhm.
translate that into wins? And I think they have a real chance to do that, but it's probably a little bit slower than certainly David Tepper wanted when he bought the team. And now, even from last year, where you draft Young and you really go through a very difficult season last year with him.
Yeah. Well, I am 33 years old. No, people do not. I don't care if people know that. I am old enough to remember Bill Parcells
Bill Parcells,
with
okay.
yep with Dallas and before that as well. I forget where he was at before Dallas, but that's okay. So
Dallas,
very familiar with.
Jets, Dolphins. I mean, he was everywhere.
Yeah, he was
So
everywhere. Giants was a little before
Giants
my
is when
time.
I was growing up. So
Yeah. Um, the draft. We saw 7 picks by the Panthers. Um, what you might say Xavier Legette, who you already mentioned, what was their who was their best pick? Who did you really say, well, he may not be a home run, but that's a darn good pick by the Panthers and someone who's going to be an immediate contributor and help out this year.
well, I mean, speaking of Bill Parcells and where Belichick got it all from, because that's really kind of the lens if you're 33 that you can think of it, right?
Yep.
Belichick's the best coach to do it. Well, who did he learn from? The Giants, if you go back and look at Mark Bavaro, that's where Belichick figured out, okay, the tight end position is super important. And any football that you look at, the quarterback's best friend is going to be the tight end. And going back to last year with Hayden Hurst, again, didn't mind the concept of getting someone in there to help your young quarterback. So we'll see what Jatavian Sanders can do in the fourth round. Feels like, Ryan, you show me a team that goes from worst to first in their division, and it happens every year, or it's happened,
Texans
19 of
last
the
year.
last 20 years. Yeah. You show me that team, and I'll show you a team that hit in the third, fourth, and fifth rounds. It's just there's just no way around it. You know what I
Yep.
mean? You have a little bit of that depth. So I do like the league at pick a lot. Brooks feels like a little bit of a scratch off, coming off of the injury, but obviously a talented player. Going to get his teammate from Texas, though. I like Jatavian Sanders. Again, I like the concept of him. And I hope what he can do will translate to the NFL. He certainly has the size to do it. He certainly has the body of work at Texas. Obviously playing in a system with Sarkisian too, that I think will help him make that transition to the NFL. So you get those types of players, and you go back to the Panthers' first Super Bowl team. Steve Smith was a third round pick.
Correct.
You know, and some of those guys up front that they had were third and fourth picks, and that's really where you make your money And unfortunately for the Panthers, they've been really good in the first round. Marty Herney was the king in the first round, man.
Yes.
Like that guy knew how to take who the heck was on the board. I mean, you just go through the list, whether he had number one overall or whether it was down to, I think he even took Burns. Might have been his last one or till he came back. But, to me, that guy knew how to make a first round pick. Where he struggled, obviously, was we're in those third and fourth and fifth rounds. So if Sanders can be the kind of security blanket, and he doesn't have to be Kyle Pitts, he doesn't have to be, he doesn't have to lead the NFL with like 110 receptions. He needs to
Mhm.
be someone who can catch 8 or 9 touchdowns and really be a safety valve for his quarterback. That's what I would see as a primary type, contributor, and that would be really great value there at 101.
Yeah. I mean, the Panthers have had tight ends going back. Obviously, we've been spoiled with Greg Olson over the years.
Olsen,
We
yeah,
have that, we had that, but then we had guys like, if you go back, Dante Rosario, Chris Mangum, obviously Wesley Walls back in the day. We had guys who were dependable, who were solid contributors at tight end, and Sanders can hopefully be that for this team. Even as a rookie, I think, like you said, he can come in right away and distribute. I really enjoyed the linebacker from Kentucky, Trevin Wallace. I think a solid replacement for Shaq maybe in 2025 after this year playing behind. But we do not have a long term answer at linebacker. That was something sorely needed, especially with Luvu leaving in free agency. So I thought that Trevin Wallace pick was quite underrated. And I'm going to trust Dan Morgan's evaluation with the
of
linebackers.
linebackers. Yeah, good call. No, it was interesting. Learned last year that Tepper was the reason that they switched from a 4-3 to a 3-4. And I think a lot of people get confused. And you didn't want to lose Frankie Luvo. I totally get that. But Burns, I don't think was a great fit for the 3-4. So if once you make that commitment, and that's on an ownership level, by the way, because of his background in Pittsburgh,
Yep.
once you make that type of commitment, you have to get the players that fit that system. We saw this at NC State. They switched from a 4-man front to a 3-man front 2 years in 2019, and pretty much every defensive end that they had recruited was worthless. And it's more than just dropping back and having to play in coverage. It's almost like a completely different mindset. So
Yep.
it'll be interesting to see how they reshape their defense. Um, Obviously, they didn't make a lot of moves. They did not make a lot of moves to reshape their defense. Rather, they kept Brown up front, which was good. But you're
Banking
right.
on
The
J.C.
line,
Horn.
yeah. And J.C. Horn, it's hard.
I love
Availability
that
is the
guy.
best ability, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think if he could just stay healthy, I think everyone knows he would totally be worth where they had drafted him in was the pandemic year, right? So
Correct.
I look at that and I go, again, you gotta hit those top picks. And right now the jury's still out on those top picks, right? Like Horn because of his injury ability, Ike Ekwonu because of his inconsistency, particularly as a pass blocker. And then I know it's early. I know it's only 1 year, and I'm not. I think people make the mistake of thinking, well, CJ Stroud is outstanding. That must mean that Bryce Young stinks. No, Bryce Young can be just as good. Bryce Young can be a very good quarterback in the NFL, independent of whatever CJ Stroud does. It just
Yeah.
really was hard if you're a Panther fan to watch last year because you're like, wait a second, we got the quarterback wrong. We gave up a king's ransom just to get the quarterback wrong. Well, he did for 1 year. That doesn't mean don't throw Bryce Young out just quite yet.
No.
This is obviously a very important season for him. And again, I think every move they've made this offseason has been to try to help him. So I applaud the Panthers for what they've done this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. The some of the Panther fan base you could listen, and it's people are overreacting to. It was an apples oranges situation that C.J. Stroud had versus what Bryce had last year. Let's start there, and then number two, Stroud. Now that they have some film on him, just like they have with Bryce as well, like Stroud has to come out and do it again. He has to prove that he can do it again this year consistently. That's what Brady did. That's what Manning did. That's what Burrow has done. Mahomes has done. The really good ones, they come out and do it year after year, and Stroud's got to prove that again. And Bryce is going to, like you said, this is a big year for him. But me personally, and I might ruffle some feathers by saying this, I do not think This is a make it or break a year for Bryce Young. Is it a big year? Well, of course, yes, it's the next year. But I don't think it's the first year under Canales' system. And I almost compare this to, and I know he's not 6'5", but I almost compare this to Trevor Lawrence's second year because Urban, the rookie year, he got fired, and then called Doug Peterson comes in, and this is essentially year one for Trevor Lawrence under Peterson after when he came in. So this is the same thing with Bryce. I think year one under Canales, even though it's technically year two. That's at least how I view it. And so I think he's going to get at least 2 years under Canales before they can even say, okay, not working, move on. But
Yeah, and plus the sunk cost is such that you have to do what they're doing and just try to do everything you can to help him. And also confidence wise, I think that was the most important thing. You go through a season where they win 2 games and you're like, uh-oh. And you fire the coach midway through it. And really it was like I kept saying the thing that the Panthers needed most last year was a fast forward button. The one thing that could really, it's true. The one thing that could really, really help Bryce Young is not losing 40% of his starting offensive line before week 2. The injuries up front last year really hurt the Panthers. And I know they've made moves in free agency. I know they've reshaped their line, but that's really kind of where this all starts. And I also think that's where Canales helps. Your play calling, Tampa last year in particular with Baker, we've already seen with Baker what his limitations are. You go back to with Seattle and Geno Smith, and you're looking at that, you're going, well, what does this guy do well? How do I put him in a position? Because as you know, Ryan, Seattle's never like going back. I don't know where you fall in the triangle here, but going back to Russell Wilson, it's like that guy never played behind a half decent offensive line in Seattle, but they still made it work.
right.
And I think people made mistakes in comparing Bryce to Russ because of his size and whatever else. But the truth of the matter is, Bryce is a good athlete. He is mobile. He's not quite that, but he can make plays with his feet in order to avoid the rush and extend plays. And that's really important at the NFL level because I got news for you. Like, how many teams look like the Chiefs? And even the teams who look like the Chiefs, by the way, even Mahomes gets the ball out so fast that part of that's coaching too with Andy Reid and the way that
Right.
he's able to maybe extend some plays. So their offensive line to me really, really, really betrayed Bryce Young in his rookie season, and then all of the problems that Icky had last year. Um, you know, hopefully he can put that behind him as well, because I did think he showed tremendous improvement as a rookie, and then last year was a full step back for him. So hopefully he can put last year behind him, and as a whole unit, their offensive line can really find an identity and really help Bryce Young make plays that I think most people know that he's capable of, given some of the better things around him now.
Yeah. Dan Morgan, former Panther linebacker, now the new general manager. A lot of people, when he got the job, of course, said, well, is this just going to be an extension of Scott Fitterer? Because, he was under Scott Fitterer as the assistant GM and he was in the building with that same staff. What are your thoughts overall so far with Dan Morgan as the GM in charge? What do you think he is going to bring that maybe Fitterer and the past guys did not? And then obviously Canales, you just touched a little bit on him as well, being our seventh head coach in Panthers history. And someone who, like you said, with Baker now in Tampa, can bring out the best in Bryce. And what does that look like, you think, for the Panthers in 2024?
Yeah, it's funny, Ryan. I have no interactions with David Tepper. I've been extremely critical of him from the
We'll
beginning.
get to Tepper in a second, but
Yeah,
go ahead.
but it's funny. I have no interaction with him. I have had no interaction with him, and Tom. But I have a lot of interaction with Tom Dundon, the Hurricanes owner, the hockey
Mhm.
team's owner, and Dundon and Tepper have I think they have a good relationship. And so I said to Dundon, you should tell Tepper to come on the show with us, because we make Dundon look good because we ask him hard questions in a way that it gives him a chance to make an honest answer and explain his answers. And I said, and this is a way of me setting up to you, the number one thing that Tom Dundon did that I've always given him credit for that was really hard to do He came into a situation and he gave Rod Brindamore a chance, even though the easiest thing to do would have just been to have said, I'm clearing house, I'm getting rid of everybody. You might be a great coach someday, but we're not finding out here because you were on a staff that was part of a failure and a team that couldn't make the playoffs. So appreciate you being the captain, appreciate your years of service as an assistant coach, but we're going in a new direction. That would have been the easy play for Tom Dundon. And the fact that he gave Rod Brindamore a chance, and the fact that it has worked out the way that it has, obviously, has been fairly remarkable. And I think Dan Morgan was in a similar situation. You're working with somebody in Scott Fitterer, and you have a connection back in Seattle as well, and you're thinking, oh well, this is just his guy. The truth of the matter is, someone like Dan Morgan played the position in the NFL as long as he did. It's kind of like a catcher in baseball, right? We see linebackers, Ron Rivera springs to mind, become successful head coaches. So I think it was really smart that David Tepper didn't just say, I'm getting rid of everybody in the previous regime because they were all failures. I thought it was smart to look at Dan Morgan as his own person, and whatever that interview process was, I want to give him credit because I've made fun of him forever for Matt Rule. Matt Rule, I asked this question so many different times and we finally got the answer. My question with Matt Rule was, what was his actual plan at quarterback? And with a straight face, Matt Rule went into a meeting with the owner of the Carolina Panthers and said, we'll just draft another Patrick Mahomes. That was his plan, Ryan. Like, how many NBA teams do you think we're just going to draft another Michael Jordan? That's how we're going to be successful, right? Oh no, we're going to just draft another Barry Bonds or another Ken Griffey. No big deal. As if they weren't like once. Yeah, we're just. He literally said to the owner that now, how stupid is the owner of the team to be like, oh yeah, we're definitely going to get another Mahomes in the draft. That's how they just grow on trees. But I do want to give Tepper credit. You see that? I can't even give the guy credit without giving him a hard time. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes to Morgan, I thought he did what Tom Dundon did, and he gave someone who was Morgan, like Rod Brindamore, a successful player, had a link to your some of your better teams as a player, and I thought that was a smart move.
Yeah. And then with Dave Canales, obviously he has the background in Tampa and now in Seattle, as we talked earlier with Russell, Gino. What does year one with Bryce, with Canales look like for the Panthers in 2024? Because you talk to some people, and it's this year's all about Bryce. He needs to just develop. Wins and losses don't matter. He just needs to develop. He needs to just let's see progress. Let's see improvement. So I'm just throwing out a number here. This is not my opinion. I'm just throwing this out here. 5, 6 wins this year as
Sure.
opposed to 2. And then on the other hand, there are folks who say, well, guess what, Ryan? The division is up for the taking. Our division really sucks, so we should be able to win this year, even though we may only have 7, 8 wins total. And that's on obviously if we have a really good year. So what is your view on those two differing trains of thought for this year?
Yeah, the NFL stands for not for long for both reasons, right? If you're not successful, you're not going to be in it for long. And when you're trying to rebuild, it really doesn't take that long.
Yeah.
Honestly, it doesn't. Now you have, like we talked about with the draft, you got to hit with some depth. Maybe they did this year. You have to get lucky not only with your coach but the quarterback and how they kind of work in concert together. I also do think the circumstances that you were in. If the Panthers were in the AFC West, I would sit here and tell you, buddy, they're going to win 3 games. Awesome. You have no hope, is what I would say. Especially with Harbaugh now, with Herbert, I expect Herbert to go up another level. Same thing if you were with the Bengals and the Browns with that
Ravens, Steelers,
defense
yep.
and the Ravens, you're sitting here going, you guys are, can't remember if we have FCC rules here or not. You guys are in trouble, right? But you put them in this division, and I thought the Saints acquitted themselves last year. The Falcons obviously are feeling some sort of way. Um, I will definitely double down on Tampa. Hey, you do it again. Show me again. because I really thought they did what you just said. They just made the best of a bad situation. You know, I didn't think they were outstanding. I thought they played well down the stretch, but by no stretch were they like this world beater. Obviously, they would have had more success in the playoffs than they did. But you know, the way I look at it, it could be both. You know what I mean? Can you win 5 or 6 games and feel better about your lot in life? Absolutely. Could you start quickly and maybe put yourself in a position where you look around the division and go, why not us?
Mhm.
And we're living in a world where NC State just won the ACC for the first time since 1987. You know what I mean? Like,
That's
so
right.
you can, and again, you know, I don't know how you feel about the Texans, and I thought Stroud was the right pick and the right player for them. But the truth of the matter is, you know, that was D'Amico Ryans coming in there, giving them a little bit of an attitude on the defensive side of the ball. But I just thought there were a lot of years there, and one of my friends is actually a scout for the Texans. I just thought they did a really good job of just throwing those darts, just especially at the receiver position. You know, Tank Dell and Nico Collins, good players. Nobody was clamoring for them out of the draft. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's Collins was quote unquote slow, too slow to play in the NFL. You know, and then look at what he did down the stretch. So I just kind of look at it like there's such a small margin for these teams, in year to year, week to week, and if you can get a little bit of that lightning in a bottle, the
Mhm.
confidence really becomes a big key. Now you can't beat yourself, right? To go back to Matt Rule, you're not playing Texas San Antonio, okay? So your 4th-and-1 BS punt fake against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is going to get you nowhere. You know what I mean? There has to be some semblance of not only an adult being your coach, but one that doesn't think he's smarter than everybody else in the NFL. So I think Canales gives them a real chance to have all of those things in place. And the easiest step to make is from bad to good. The hardest step to make is good to great.
Yep. I had earlier in the off season, I had Anish Shroff on play-by-play man for the Panthers. As our listeners know, he talked about the word, and this is not he's only not the only one who has said this word. Is this year he feels like there is finally alignment with the owner, with the GM, and with the head coach, and I feel like that's going to play a big deal in how the Panthers do this year. So speaking of David Tepper, I'll give you another. I'll throw you another bone here. Um, we all heard of some things down in there in Dilworth. I'm in the Raleigh area, but I'm from Charlotte, so I know very much where Dilworth is. Um, we also heard at the press conference earlier, with our friend Joe Person, who also has been on this podcast. He said uh, he tried to interview Dave for a comment. He said, "Nope, I'm in the background now." So, what is your thought, kind of going forward with Tepper? Do you think he stays in the background? Can he do it? And if so, I think that is good. Only good things for the Panthers if he can truly stay out of the way and let. As the what did the sign say? Let the GM and coach pick the players this year.
I would love it for David Tepper to again emulate Tom Dundon, hire the hockey people, the coach and the GM, and let them do their job. Um, I know it's harder. I know it's easier said than done when you have that much money and you've been so successful in all of your other ventures in life. You believe that, well, I can just play fantasy football. I can just play Madden. I can just, I can snap my fingers and make this work because I have all this money. I don't know if he has it in him to stay out of the way. The weekly meetings bother me. I'm not gonna lie to you. I think Frank Reich was like, I'm 62. I'm too old for this. Canales obviously is younger and on his way up, but I got to imagine, Ryan, that if you had to report to somebody each week and you knew more about the subject than they did, and they're going to sit there and be like, well, let their foot work and this and that. And it's like, okay,
I,
bud,
I
you got to
might
hire me and let me do my job. That's what I
I
think.
think I might disagree slightly, only to say, like, I mean, it's like he works for. David Tepper, that's his boss. And I mean, most jobs you got to report to your boss at least once a week for a meeting, have your weekly check-in. So I don't see a problem with that at all, personally.
Yeah. I mean, do you really think the Rooney family does that with Mike Tomlin every week, breaking down film and looking
Yeah,
at
you
plays?
got a
And
point.
I don't
You got a
think
point.
so. I don't think successful sports owners operate that way. Um,
Anyway,
I get
yeah,
the idea too. And again, if he had come from Dallas or Washington, I would say that's where he learned it. Cool. He literally was a minority owner with the
the
Steelers,
Steelers of all teams. Yeah,
the model franchise.
yeah,
So, listen, if he had a director of common sense, I'd feel better about it for him, but he obviously doesn't. Going into the Dilworth, whatever he said, I know the owner came out and said he was cordial and what just wanted to talk or whatever it was, but it's like somebody needs to be a doctor no for that guy. Hey, that's not a good idea. Nope, 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 nope.
yeah,
That's your job. You just tell somebody nope, nope, nope,
mhm,
nope, 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 nope,
yeah.
nope.
Let's do a couple of quick hitters, and then I'll get you out of here with some predictions. Jera Avero, Panthers defensive coordinator. Very rare that we have brought back the entire staff on the defensive side of the football, which I think is really key. Um,
Yeah, it's
Talk
good.
about what you saw from Avero last year on defense, and if this does end up being his last year with the Panthers and he gets a head coaching job in 25, do you think we have the next defense coordinator on this roster, someone who could easily be elevated? But your thoughts on the defense for this year with Avero still in charge?
Yeah, obviously last year was tough. You're putting in a new system, and the pieces you had, you probably felt like did not fit that system. And then, the problem for Brian Burns was everyone knew what they had turned down in order to keep him in terms of the first round picks from the Rams. So now it becomes, well, if you're worth 3 first round picks, why don't you have like 58 sacks? I don't understand. And you switch systems and it kind of limits his effectiveness. And playing 4 contracts is always it's tough, man. Not a lot of people thrive in that situation.
Yeah,
So it's difficult. Um, so I look at their defense last year. Chin was such a big part of it 2 years ago, and obviously he's gone. The linebacker turnover situation is such that you're just and Luo had an outstanding season last year. So you're sitting here going, geez, you let your best linebacker go. Um, so I think it's going to be tough, but again, I do think there is an advantage to keeping that entire staff. I do think there is an advantage to even moving on from players. We've seen this really work in baseball where
yeah,
you lose a player and you're like, wow, you just, let's go back to the A's 20 years ago. Oh, you just let Jason Giambi go for nothing. And it's like, yeah, because I can just go get another guy to come play first base. Like, sometimes we overvalue based on our emotions of what a player was and what a player wasn't. So I think defensively in particular, I don't know how many difference makers they have on defense. That gives me pause. Now, JC Horn can be a difference maker if he can stay on the field. The system they're going to play in, I don't see Brown necessarily as a difference maker, but that's a position where you really need to have that person in order for the linebackers and pass rushers around him to be effective. So I do think having him in place helps. The big question is now, can some of those younger linebackers and newer linebackers step in and make some plays where you're like, okay, this is going to work? You probably need 2 or 3 difference makers on defense. Going back to Parcells and Belichick, they had the Belichick always had a corner, always had a safety, always had a linebacker where someone could get to the quarterback. And then obviously always the Vince Wilfork type eating up all that space in the middle. So I think the Panthers have potentially 2 of those important parts, but are you really going to need to see 2 other guys develop around them where you're like, okay, this is really going to work for them.
yeah. Jadeveon Clowney, who we Panthers assigned this offseason, DJ Wonnum are the two starting defensive ends. We'll see how that goes. Clowney had 9 sacks last year with the Ravens. He's never really been a big sack guy up until as far as numbers go, and through this year with the Ravens, obviously he had a good year. Won him. He had Daniil Hunter with the Vikings on the other side of him last year, so would have been nice to see him on the other side of maybe Burns, but we'll never know
Yeah.
on that side. But I'd say top 10, top 12 is kind of where I'm thinking this Panthers defense could fit, depending on the takeaways. I think takeaways is the number one thing for the team this year is to get more takeaways because Morgan flat out said it. We did not take the ball away enough last year, and that hurt us big time, especially when teams got in the red zone. It was like every time they were scoring touchdowns or settling for field goals, we just didn't pick the ball off enough. So takeaways
Yeah,
will
it's
be
a
the
lot
key.
has to do with where you're playing too, right? Again, if you had to face Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert 4 times or Joe Burrow, then you're sitting there going, "Oh, well, you're in trouble." Well, and they're not playing that side of
We're
the
not
river,
playing that.
so
No.
I think that helps. I think that situation helps. The disappointing thing for the Panthers last year was, and even 22, the division wasn't great, and they weren't unable to, kind of put anything sustainable together. Obviously, Steve Wilkes had them playing defensively and kind of a running style, old timey football that helped them down the stretch. But it's like, you're not asking them to go out and beat the '89 Niners here. You're asking them to go out and beat some other teams who look a lot like they do.
Yeah.
And honestly, it shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but to your point, though, it does require doing all of the things that successful football teams do. Take care of the football. Don't give away the football, and also cause your own turnovers. And that's where your difference makers come in. Who can be your difference makers? So that's my primary question for their defense. Who will be their difference makers?
Well, and as Dave Canales said, getting the football right, and I think that's where it starts. Last three for you. We'll get you out of here. Bryce Young. What does a successful season this year look like for him?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say progress, but gosh, the bar is so low for that. I think the word that you used, alignment, I feel like if you can leave this season and you feel like, Dave Canales put him in the best possible position to make plays, and then he made obviously more plays, he helped them win more games, then you're going to feel like, okay, you made a jump, obviously from year 1 to year 2. Now let's see the best possible version of you in year 3. And given the number one reason that they drafted him because of his decision making and his processing, I don't think you're asking that much for him to make a good jump this year. I don't. Obviously, statistically, he was a mess last year. And I don't put all that on him. I thought I watched a couple. I'm gonna be honest with you. I watched a couple of the preseason games. I really liked the play action stuff. I really liked it when he was on under center, and I think that's when you give your quarterback a best chance to survive and make plays, when you keep the defense guessing. The number of times during the regular season I see him in the shotgun running a read option, or some sort of RPO action, and I'm like, this is not going to work for you. You have to make the defense guess, and this is not Cam. The last time you had 1-1, you had a physical specimen who could make plays, who could outrun defenses, who could run by them, who could pick up those short yardage situations. And different player, different size, different player, different strengths. And it'll be interesting to see what Canales does with him. I think he did a little bit of this with Baker Mayfield, where you saw the play actions, the bootlegs, keeping defenses honest, especially on first and second down. I'm a big run when you think they think you're gonna pass, and pass when they think you're gonna run. Football is not complicated. I know we try to make it super complicated, but it's
Yeah.
really not. Um, and if you could be a little bit unpredictable, but you also have to just figure out what your guy does best. I never felt like there was at any point last year where I thought the Panthers coaching staff, whatever iteration it was, figured out, okay, this is what Bryce does best. Um, honestly, I know they paid so much to get him, but they could have played the Red Rifle for about a month last year, and it probably would not have hurt um, Bryce's development to watch a few games, especially after the injuries up front. But in terms of progress, yeah, I think again he stayed healthy last year. That was a big question. So
Better
you
than
have
any other
that.
quarterback that was drafted. Levis
Yeah,
missed a few games. Richardson was out most of the year, and Stroud missed more than a few games as well with that concussion. So
yeah. So Richardson's the great compare and contrast. I thought the Colts went young and risky with coach and quarterback, and the Panthers went old and safe with Reich and Young. And, again, just because one way works doesn't mean the other way automatically fails. It's now up to Dave Canales to really make sure that Bryce Young is put in the best position, not only to develop, but to have success here in year two.
yeah. Uh, Last two. What are we not talking enough about with the Panthers? It can be a player, it can be team overall. What are we not talking about enough?
Well, I know they attempted to fix their offensive line through free agency mostly. I was still a little bit surprised that they didn't use any draft picks on offensive linemen, which I thought was unusual. Um, so, the offensive line, do you trust that they got it right? Do they have
I
any
think at
kind of
least we
depth?
have more depth. I would say
Yeah,
this year,
and do you
the
have some
very
more depth?
minimum, bare
Because
minimum.
it's
I would say.
hard to prepare again to lose 40% of your starting lineup in the first 2 weeks. It's impossible to prepare for.
Right, exactly.
So I don't blame them for that. I would like to see Icky find his way. I thought he showed over the last half of his rookie season that he was at least capable of being, above replacement level starter. I thought he really, really struggled last year, not only with pass blocking but with penalties, and it was a real throwaway year for him. So again, I can go back, and football's not that hard. Get that offensive line fixed, and did they make the right moves in free agency? Given the way that the draft has gone the last, 5 to 10 years, and the way the football's changed in the last 5 to 10 years, it is more difficult to sit there and draft Tony Baselli and know you're going to have a starter for the next 20 years of left. I mean, it's not going to happen anymore. There's been more failures up front than there have been real. Joe Thomas, I guess, is the last one.
Yeah,
There's been more failures in the top 10 on offensive linemen in the last 5 years than any other position because the game has changed so much.
yeah,
So I don't necessarily blame them for not building through the draft, but you just want to make sure that they got the right pieces. When the only way to know that is to see them out there on the field and see them play.
yeah. Uh, Give me your two predictions, and I'll get you out of here. And these can be short or however long you want them to be. Who is the one Panthers player that we will be talking about next year during the season, during next offseason, that in a positive way, like this guy stepped up for the Panthers this year, and he's going to be a key contributor for us going forward and into this new kind of regime that we've got going here.
Well, given the shelf life of the position, let's go full in on the scratch off ticket and Jonathan Brooks. I think
Okay.
if he recovers and he's healthy, he gives you a real chance. There's how many home run hitters they have last year? Chuba was so steady. Even Deontay Foreman the year before was steady. But obviously Christian's the last one you've seen McCaffrey be a home run hitter. And I think the offense sorely needs that. And so, hopefully he recovers and puts himself in a position where he can have a lot of success. And, again, that's pretty good value in the second round. I know some people are like, oh, they traded up, then they traded down, then they gave away this, but it wasn't the old, here's my future for Sam Darnold and Matt Corral. You know what I mean? Like, so I think
Yeah.
there was at least a purpose to what they were trying to do with Brooks. So I'll go with Brooks.
Last one, your boldest prediction for 2024 Carolina Panthers is what?
I predicted them to make the playoffs last year, so I'll stop a step short there. Um, man, winning
And
record
you don't
gets
have
you
to
into
say
the
a
play.
record. It can just be a
Yeah, I was going
bold
to say
prediction.
winning record gets you into the playoffs. You know what? I think they'll go into the last 3 weeks of the season with a chance to make the playoffs. I really do. Um, this hard reset helps them. Obviously, they need to stay healthy up front. But I like, the point that you're making about the defense and the continuity. on the staff. I think that's very helpful. Then again, all of the things they've done to help Bryce. I think he'll have a much, I don't want to say better year because he was so average. I think he'll have the kind of year where people go, oh, that's why he was the number one pick. Got it. Because there was too many people in the NFL who thought he should have been the number one overall pick. Now, I was not one of those people, but there was too many of them for them all to be wrong. You know what I mean? Like for the majority of people to be like, yeah, Bryce Young was the best quarterback in that draft. Okay. My retort was, did you watch the Georgia game? I don't know. Did you? But my quibbles with Bryce Young have always been where he was from. Um, when you play at Alabama, you have the best coach, you have the best offensive line, you have the best of everything. You have a built-in 14-point lead before the game. Every game starts. You have the sunniest of sunny days. And so last year he had the stormiest of all storms that he had to go through. And if he comes through that, I do believe he'll be a better player. That doesn't mean he didn't work hard at Alabama. It's just easier at Alabama than it is, say, NC State, than it is at, Michigan State. These are still Power Five programs, but you understand what I'm saying. So that was always my primary concern for Bryce Young. Did he have it too easy at Alabama? Did he have too many advantages at Alabama? Well, he had none of those advantages last year and he struggled. So now, how do you help him? And I think that's been the primary theme for the Panthers this offseason. And I think you'll see him perform at a level where people can remember, okay, yeah, that's the guy who won the Heisman Trophy. That's the guy I remember at Alabama.
So we'll mark you down for just into the contention of playoffs. Joe Giglio,
It's
the
not,
half.
it's not very bold, right? But I
Yeah,
just, you know what I mean?
we'll mark it there.
Maybe I whammoed them last year. Um, I certainly wimbled Miles Sanders, man. I took him like in the third round of my fantasy league. I'm like, look at all these great numbers he had with the Eagles, and Frank Reich's gonna know what to do with them. And then, gosh,
Yeah.
that was such a mess. So I don't want to do that to him again. So I'll just say I'll keep it super safe and just say I do think they'll make a lot of progress. I do think they'll win at least 7 games. I really do. I just think you're going to see some real improvement, and I think it'll be a much, much, much more enjoyable season for Panthers fans, even if it doesn't end in the playoffs. I think you're starting to see them be on the right road back to what they can be.
And that will do it for this episode of Inside the Vault. As I said at the top, my guest today was the half of Julius and Giglio and Ovius. Joe Giglio, my guest today. Joe, thanks for coming on the podcast. Anything you want to plug before we let you go?
No, just give us a search there, Ovius and Giglio on the YouTubes or Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. We're there, Ovius and Giglio. Appreciate you guys.
All right, episode 36 in the books for Inside the Vault. Rate, review, and subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating. That really helps us market and promote. We'll see you next time. Thanks again for listening.